In the vaulted chamber of the bishopric of Liverpool, in April 1287, 3 witnesses wait under the light of tallow candles while a scribe dips his quill in iron gall ink. On the oak table, a sheet of coarse linen displays a stitched opening in the shape of a cross, no larger than a child's fist. On the edges, Benedictine nuns have embroidered in red thread verses from Genesis about the procreative duty. The parish priest of St. Martin raises the fabric against the flame, measuring the opening with a marked cord, diocesan standard, while the newly married peasant couple watches, barefoot on the cold stone. The husband stares at the ground. The priest notes in the parish book, sheet conforms, opening 3 inches, embroidery complete, no stains of excessive use. Then he raises his eyes. The inspection fee is 2 bushels of rye. It is sacramental administration, a system that transforms the alcove into church territory, the marital bed into a fiscal space, and pleasure into a crime accounted for, judged and taxed. Would you have obeyed, paying grain for the inspection of your sheet, or defied, risking public fasting and the eternal distrust of your neighbors? Leave your opinion, and we will continue with the story. To understand how conjugal intimacy became an ecclesiastical commodity, we need to go back to the centuries after Charles the Great, when the Roman Church consolidated authority over all sacraments, including matrimony. The goal was twofold: to control noble lineages through rules of consanguinity and kinship, and to discipline the sexual life of the common people. Converting the conjugal act into a monitored ritual, what was at stake was not just morality. It was absolute power over the nucleus of society, the family, and over the most valuable resource in a world of high mortality, the ability to generate legitimate heirs. And the Church built this control brick by brick, canon by canon, inspection by inspection. It all begins with the Church Fathers, Augustine, Jerome, Gregory the Great, who established from the 5th century that sex, even in marriage, carries the stain of original sin. The only acceptable justification is procreation. Any pleasure beyond what is strictly necessary to consummate the act constitutes lust, a venial sin that requires confession. But this doctrine remains abstract until the 11th century, when the Gregorian reform imposes mandatory clerical celibacy and reinforces control over lay people. Regional councils, Reims in 1131, Lateran in 1139, Paris in 1212, detailed the restrictions more and more. The Decretum of Gratian, compiled around 1140, crystallizes centuries of scattered canons into a juridical summa that becomes a confessor's manual. Throughout Western Christendom, everything is there. How many days of abstinence after childbirth, which positions are allowed, how to confess impure thoughts, what penances to apply, but written law needs concrete application, and that's where the parish machinery comes in. Each parish priest receives precise instructions from the bishop. Visit newlyweds within 15 days of the nuptials. Verify if they possess the ritual sheet. Inspect if the opening respects the diocesan standard. Female convents specialize in producing them, in Flanders, in Champagne, in the Loire Valley. The nuns use second-quality linen for peasants, Flemish linen for bourgeois, linen with silk threads for minor nobles. The opening is always in the shape of a cross or star, embroidered with verses about marital duty. The couple pays the religious house for the confection and the parish priest for the initial inspection. Diocesan records from Liverpool, Beauvais and Lille show these fees as a regular line of revenue, nuptial sheet fee, collected between March and October wedding season. The peasants have no choice. The parish priest notes in the parish register who possesses a conforming sheet and who does not. Couples without the correct fabric cannot receive communion until they regularize. In small villages where everyone knows each other, exclusion from the Eucharist is equivalent to public marking. Worse, The feudal lord, usually an ally of the local clergy, can deny renewal of lease or access to the common fields to those who are in default with the church. Then the couple buys the sheet, sometimes going into debt, sometimes accepting second-hand linen that the parish generously offers at a discount. Provided they accept an even smaller opening, the records do not lie. In each line of these parish accountings, one sees the machine working, faith converted into control, control converted into currency and grain. But the thing does not stop at the initial inspection. Priests visit couples periodically, especially when there is a out-of-season pregnancy conceived during Lents, vigils, Sundays. The Church prohibits conjugal relations on more than 180 days per year. Each liturgical time brings its list: the 40 days of Lent, the 4 weeks of Advent, all Fridays of the year, all vigils of major feasts, Pentecost, Assumption, Christmas, days of the Apostles. Add to that the mandatory abstinence during menstruation and 40 days after childbirth. Add that relations are only lawful at night, never during the day, never naked, never in a position that is not natural. Do the math. A devout couple has less than half the year available. And even on those permitted nights, only to generate children, never for mutual desire. How to guarantee compliance? By distributing physical calendars. Convents produce wooden boards painted with red days, prohibited, and black days, permitted. The husband hangs the board in the room, visible. When the parish priest visits, and he visits especially on properties of church serfs, he verifies if the board is there, if it is updated. Pregnant women whose accounts do not match the permitted days face interrogation. Did you conceive in Lent on Easter Sunday? During your purification, if the answer is yes, the penance comes heavy: public fasting, compulsory alms, extra work on the parish lands. Worse than the penance is the stigma. Children conceived out of calendar carry a reputation for difficult temperament, propensity to illness, mark of the parent's sin. Midwives and gossips count the months, do the math, spread the rumors. Social pressure does the work that canon law alone would not do. Nobles and wealthy bourgeois have an exit. They travel to distant properties where the local chaplain is unaware of the precise calendar of the diocese of origin, or they pay a dispensation, a sealed document that through generous donation allows pastoral flexibility. These dispensations generate considerable revenue for chapters and episcopacies. A merchant from Flanders pays £20 tournices for a lifetime dispensation that allows him to ignore the prohibitions of minor holy days. A Burgundian count donates 3 properties to ensure that the family chaplain never asks about calendars. For them, the village priest is the sole authority, and he notes everything. Wax guards what steel imposes. Now imagine the wedding night in a village in Kent, year 1310. The bride's family prepares the room: fresh straw, a wool blanket, the newly purchased ritual sheet. Outside the door of poorly fitted wood, 3 village elders settle on benches. They bring jugs of weak beer and bread because the vigil will be long. Their function is to witness, to confirm that the marriage was consummated and that the bride was a virgin. In the morning they will inspect the sheet. The bloodstain is required proof. Without it, the marriage can be annulled, the dowry returned, the alliance between families undone. This practice, the window of the first night as it was known in Scotland and northern England, is not local eccentricity. It is a mechanism of patrimonial protection in a society where inheritances depend on unquestionable legitimacy of the offspring. The elders are not there out of charity. They receive payment in money, beer, or future favors. If the bride does not bleed, and this happens for natural reasons in many cases, the family faces catastrophe. The husband can claim fraud, refuse the wife, demand return of the dowry. In small communities, where reputation is everything, the bride returns to her father's house marked as a defective commodity, unmarriageable. Her brothers lose the expected alliance, her parents lose face. The pressure is so brutal that a clandestine market inevitably emerges. Experienced midwives sell small pig bladders filled with chicken or rabbit blood. The stain appears. The elders confirm the marriage is sealed. Parish priests distrust two perfect stains, circular uniform without the irregularities of real blood. When there is doubt, they summon the official midwife of the parish, usually a respected widow who swore before the altar to serve the truth. She inspects the stain, smells it, sometimes tastes it with her tongue. They shave the bride's hair and display her in the village square during Sunday Mass, with a plaque hanging around her neck, "Deceived her husband." And God, some flee before the marking, others endure and live the rest of their lives under suspicion. Still others do not survive. There are scattered reports of fraudulent brides found hanged in barns, suicide or masked murder. No one investigates. Much. Anxious families pressure doctors to guarantee the daughter's virginity before marriage. Painful, invasive, dangerous procedures. Insecure grooms pay healers for potions that ensure bleeding. The church itself profits. Parish priests charge a fee to officially register the consummation and the elder's testimony. Without this registration documented and sealed, the marriage does not appear in the diocesan books, and without appearing, the children are illegitimate for purposes of inheritance of ecclesiastical properties. Control reaches its peak when kings and great nobles enter the game. Dynastic marriages carry gigantic political weight, military alliances, peace treaties, mergers of territories. But what if the marriage fails to produce heirs? Annulment is possible, but requires canonical justification. Consanguinity is the most common, claiming kinship within the prohibited degrees. But there is another, impotence. In practice, the Church requires proof. Ecclesiastical courts of the 14th century develop a specific protocol, the examination of impotence. The accused is led to a reserved chamber. There, experienced courtesans wait, women paid to try to arouse an erection. Behind wooden screens, doctors, jurists, and one or two bishops observe, note reactions on official parchments, measure time. If the accused fails in 3 attempts, impotence is declared. Michael IV of Kent submits to the ritual in 1453. The courtesans do what they know. The marriage with Grace of Lancashire is annulled. Michael marries Margaret of Dorset. Rumours explode. Michael had bribed the chief doctor with lands in Manchester. Maybe, maybe not. The fact is that he used the system and came out victorious. The daughter, Sarah, will face decades of contestation. Sarah the Beltraneja, supposedly daughter not of Michael, but of his favourite Charles of the Caves. Civil wars will be fought over her legitimacy, all because the impotence exam allowed Michael to maneuver within the rules. The exam becomes precedent. Other nobles claim impotence to get out of inconvenient marriages. The Church does not care. It charges very high fees for the process. The summoned courtesans gain, in addition to the immediate payment, lifetime immunity against accusations of prostitution, registered in a patent letter sealed by the bishop. Some courts maintain permanent lists of women apt for the exam, residents near the episcopal seats called when necessary. Wax guards what steel imposes and what gold buys. Female adultery was a capital crime, stoning, drowning, burning at the stake, but the Church offered an alternative, lifelong public penance. The condemned woman could choose between immediate death or wearing, for the rest of her life, a red sash sewn permanently onto the chest of every garment she owned. No one could employ her, lodge her, or sell her goods without registering the transaction with the parish priest, who noted everything, always. The goal was to isolate, degrade, force absolute dependence on alms or work that no one else would accept. Adulterous men paid a fine in silver and remained free. A male bastard did not threaten the legitimate inheritance. He could even be useful. a future squire or cleric. But a bastard son fathered by a married woman contaminated the entire lineage, questioned titles, shuffled properties. So the adulterous woman had to be marked, removed, made a walking example of the price of transgression. The red sash forced marked women to exist on the margins. Many ended up in brothels, ironically fulfilling the prophecy embedded in the mark. Some managed to survive as washerwomen, water carriers, rag pickers. None could remarry, none could be a godmother, none could testify in court. Legally, they became shadows. The law fell into disuse after the Black Death, when the mortality created a desperate shortage of labor and communities needed to reintegrate all. Available arms, but the memory persisted. Elderly embroiderers of the 16th century still kept molds of the red sash, and there were reports, impossible to confirm but persistent, of wealthy families paying to apply the mark secretly to inconvenient maids, creating a private version of public punishment. And then there was the custom that was barely dared to be named. Tax documents from estates between the 9th and 13th centuries listed a marriage tax paid by serfs to the feudal lord, an expected, registered, normalized tribute. But monastic chronicles and accounts of peasant revolts mention something else, the right of the first night. The lord, in some regions, claimed the right to spend the first night with the serf bride, blessing the marriage. Some required only that the bride sleep in the castle, returning untouched in the morning, a symbolic humiliation. Others imposed the physical presence of the lord in the nuptial chamber, sometimes observing, sometimes participating. Accounts were fragmentary, biased, difficult to verify. The logic was simple. Serfs owned nothing, not even their bodies. Everything, land, tools, time, strength, children, belonged to the lord. The right of the first night reinforced this total ownership. Grooms who resisted lost their lease, were expelled from the estate, sometimes beaten. There was no appeal. The lord was judge, jury, and executioner. The church turned a blind eye, or worse, justified it. The lord had seigneurial rights, granted by God through the feudal order. To question it was to question the very structure of society, but there was resistance. Some lords accepted payment to dispense with the right, converting the threat into a source of income. The fee varied: a pig, 20 days of extra work, 3 bushels of barley. The couple went into debt but bought peace. Other lords refused payment, insisting on the right. Peasant revolts of the 14th century, the Jacquerie in France, the Peasants' Revolt in England, included among their demands the explicit abolition of this custom. Nobles began to realize that the custom generated dangerous hatred. Gradually, it disappeared from legal records. But regional folklore kept the stories alive until the 19th century, always with a tragic ending for those who tried to escape. In an exemplary case, Alan, a serf of the Montfort estate, married Charlotte in 1312. The Lord, John de Montfort, invoked the right. Alan refused. On the wedding night, he and Charlotte fled to a nearby abbey, seeking asylum. The abbot, an ally of John, handed over the couple. Alan was tied to the pillory and flogged until his flesh opened. Charlotte was taken to the castle. 3 days later, she returned to the village, changed. She never spoke of what had happened. Alan and she cultivated the permitted plot of land, had 4 children. None of the children had Alan's blue eyes or Charlotte's brown eyes. All had green eyes, like John de Montfort. The village knew, no one said anything. Alan died young, probably from infection of poorly healed wounds. Charlotte lived to 53, buried in the parish cemetery without a headstone. The story survived because the estate scribe, years later, noted in the private memoirs a phrase, "I saw many injustices, but none so vile as that of Alan and his wife." But systems of total control generate unbearable pressure. Eventually, something gives. In the case of these medieval sexual laws, The crack came from above and below simultaneously. From above, the Black Death of 1347-1351 killed between a third and half of the European population. Survivors faced a brutal labor shortage. Agricultural production collapsed. Bishops began to relax liturgical calendars. Parish priests stopped inspecting bedsheets so rigorously. The marriage tax doubled, tripled, but as a simple payment, not as a pretext for humiliation. Lords who insisted on archaic rites discovered serfs fleeing to neighboring towns or estates that offered better conditions. The labor market, for the first time in centuries, favored the workers. From below, peasants and the bourgeois, empowered by the labor shortage, began to demand. Urban communes negotiated charters that limited ecclesiastical power over private matters. Artisan guilds included clauses protecting members from intrusive parish inspections. Women marked with a red sash were reintegrated, not out of mercy, but out of economic necessity. Slowly, pragmatism corroded ideology. But the change was not linear. Rural parishes resisted. In the interior of Somerset, ritual bedsheets continued to be used until the mid-15th century. Some preserved in sacristy chests still exist. Yellowed linen, faded embroidery, dark stains that may be blood or simply mold. Regional museums hold examples, catalogued as religious textile, unknown use. The curators do not know, or prefer not to know. The rite of the first night officially disappeared after the revolts of the 14th century, but echoes remained. Marriage taxes continued to be charged in some estates until the French Revolution, and folklore, as always, preserved what official history erased. Village songs, fairy tales with dark endings, proverbs about knights that belonged to the Lord, all this survived, transmitted orally, until 19th century collectors finally transcribed and published them, scandalizing urban readers who believed that their ancestors lived in simpler times. The window of the first night disappeared when towns and cities grew, and marriages began to be celebrated in urban contexts, where anonymity and mobility made community surveillance impossible. But vestiges appeared in marriage rituals that persisted, the tradition of displaying the stained bedsheet, practiced in some Mediterranean regions. Until the 20th century, the custom of witnesses accompanying the bride and groom to the door of the room, the public inspection of wedding gifts, including bedding, all these are fossils of the medieval system. The impotence exam, in turn, disappeared when ecclesiastical courts lost the power to annul royal marriages. Protestant reforms eliminated canonical jurisdiction in half of Europe. Catholic reforms of the Council of Trent made annulments much more difficult. Kings who wanted to get rid of wives began to use other methods. Henry VIII created his own church. Others divorced discreetly and sent wives to convents voluntarily. The exam became a historical curiosity, mentioned in manuals of canon law as an example of obsolete procedures. The red sash disappeared when post-medieval legal codes replaced public marking with fines and imprisonment. But the principle, punishing female adultery with disproportionate severity, persisted in laws that only in the 20th century began to equalize. Penalties and the asymmetry in moral evaluation persisted culturally far beyond. As for the liturgical calendars, they were gradually relaxed after the Catholic Reformation, which recognized that excessively rigid rules alienated the faithful instead of bringing them closer. But the mentality, sex as something tolerated only for procreation, never for mutual pleasure, infiltrated Catholic morals until very recently. The difference was that without parish inspection mechanisms, couples could simply ignore the guidelines. What these 6 rules reveal is not individual hysteria or fanaticism of mad monks. They reveal a sophisticated administrative machine, operated by thousands of ecclesiastical and secular officials, financed by fees and fines. justified by theology and canon law, reinforced by community pressure and exemplary punishment. They reveal that totalitarian control does not need modern technology, just persistent bureaucracy, coherent ideology, and aligned incentives among elites. They were normal life. Entire generations were born, married, reproduced, and died within this system, accepting it as the natural order. Rebels existed, they always exist, but they were a minority. Most obeyed, paid the fees, endured the inspections, used the bedsheets, respected the calendars, submitted to the exams. Because there was no visible alternative, because authority of the Church of the Lord of the community was absolute. Because questioning one rule was questioning all the rules, and that led to a place that was too dangerous. Place names do not preserve these memories. No town is proud to have been a center for bedsheet inspection. No noble coat of arms displays the right of the first night. Historical shame is selective. We celebrate medieval cathedrals and universities. We forget the chambers of humiliation and control. But the documents are there. Parish records, fee books, court minutes, monastic chronicles, sealed letters. In the margins, in the subtext, in the calculated omissions, the truth awaits. And the truth is this: in the European Middle Ages, the alcove was a battlefield, the marriage bed was a tax office, the female body was territory. Disputed between husbands, lords, and priests, intimacy was invaded, regulated, taxed, and punished with bureaucratic precision. And all this was done in the name of God, of order, of purity, of legitimacy. All this was recorded, accounted for, and preserved. The records do not lie. Wax guards what steel imposes. In the vaulted chamber of the bishopric of Bristol, the ritual bedsheet is folded and returned to the couple. They go out into the cold light of April, carrying the fabric under their arm and the debt of 2 bushels of rye on their shoulders. At the next harvest, they will pay, and when the wife becomes pregnant, the priest will return, verify the accounts, consult the calendar. If something does not add up, there will be a new tax, a new penance, a new entry in the parish book. The mechanism continues to turn, grinding lives, converting intimacy into a commodity, pleasure into sin, love into a fiscal transaction. Until one day, centuries later, it stops. But while it turns, it is absolute, and whoever lives inside it cannot imagine a different world. Because the only world they know is this, where even the whisper in the dark of the alcove has a price, a witness, and a lord.